for joining me. My name is Christina Gray. I'm the official opposition leader and House Leader. We just finished the Member Services Committee meeting, and it was a doozy. At that committee meeting, Danielle Smith's handpicked members, including her chief government whip, decided to raise MLA salaries, make sure that they have annual increases going forward from the same people who de-indexed benefits to seniors and those on disability. They've decided to give MLAs golden parachutes once again and made an adjustment from the recommendation that was originally made by a consultant to make sure that most MLAs will be getting the maximum benefit when they depart office. They increased constituency office budgets, and we learned that last year, just before Christmas, when the UCP increased their temporary allowance, their rent, by 14%, they did that counter to the consultant's recommendation that it could go up maybe 6%. So they looked at that and said, oh, let's do double, more than that amount. Finally, in a surprise move with inadequate information, completely uncosted, they made a significant change to how Caucus budget is funded, essentially allowing ministers to double dip taxpayer dollars to get more money, something that will cost taxpayers more than $1 million and will tilt the playing field in the government's favor. All of these increases to MLA compensation, pay, benefits, the official opposition opposed and opposed strongly, but the UCP used their majority to defeat our opposition, and so these changes will be moving forward. And it's really inappropriate given the current affordability crisis and what is happening for Albertans, that this is the direction that the UCP government chose to go. Today in Fort McMurray, education assistants who in many cases have not received a pay increase in a decade, who earn an average of $34,000 a year, and who work in incredibly challenging circumstances given the chronic underfunding of the education system by the UCP government, they're on a strike line. And today is also the day that the UCP MLAs voted to give themselves annual pay increases. The amount of disconnect between the government and the lived realities of Albertans is mind-boggling. They are completely out of touch, and the decisions made at committee today were entirely self-serving. I'm happy to take questions.
Thank you. Just a reminder, if you're on Zoom, it's the raise hand function to get in the question queue. If you're on the phone, it's *9. We'll start in the room.
Hi, Sean Amato with City News. The UCP accused you of grandstanding in there. Why could the NDP not support any of these, given that your rents have gone up, your mortgages have probably gone up, like Albertans, your cost of food, these kinds of things? Do they not have a fair point to make that the price of everything has gone up for everybody, therefore it should be reflected in some of these amounts?
So today the UCP focused on addressing the affordability crisis for politicians, where they've completely ignored responding to that for average everyday Albertans. They've taken no action to address rent increases for Albertans, and yet 14% increase for themselves. The bargaining mandates and the underfunding of the education system have put education assistants on a strike line today, and yet today the MLAs are giving themselves a pay increase. I will say that when the proposal came forward, and this is in the independent consultant's report, but it was done earlier, that the Legislative Assembly and MLAs, when it comes to per diem and mileage rates, that we should mirror what the government of Alberta has, passed with full support from both parties. Like, reasonable suggestion, makes sense. But when it comes to the entitlement that we are seeing from this government and giving themselves higher pay and benefits at a time that most Albertans are struggling with an affordability crisis, and when I reflect on how their rent increase of 14%, more than double what was recommended by an independent consultant, was received by Albertans, I know that the UCP majority has no regard for what's going on with everyday Albertans, and I'm quite comfortable that the official opposition could not support those changes, and we did not.
So when you include housing, I believe it's 5 increases that are in the works or being recently done. The UCP MLA gets and couldn't give us a total cost of what this will cost taxpayers. What do you think of that? And do you have any estimates of how much all of this will cost taxpayers?
No, that's a really important point. Normally, what you would expect from a member services committee and the work of a subcommittee is it is diligently done with respect for taxpayer dollars to understand the impacts of what might happen. In this case, there are 2 proposals that the government caucus added in at the last moment without full costing. And when I tried to ask very pointed questions about those costs, we could not get the answers. The change to caucus budget is over $1 million, maybe closer to 2, we don't know. The change to allow a golden parachute for MLAs when they are no longer elected was increased significantly, and yet there was no costing for what that might look like. This is a terrible way for a government to be doing business, but it falls along with them hiding things, changing FOIP rules so that you can't find out information, and doing things that are self-serving and not being accountable to the Alberta public.
Hi, Shalane Skolsky with CTV News. I know you haven't had a long time to crunch the numbers, but I guess just following up on my colleague's question, safe to say this will be into the millions, or what are you estimating that this would cost taxpayers?
So just the caucus budget piece is going to be $1 million. For the other pieces, we don't have the numbers in front of us. So it's incumbent on the UCP government, the UCP caucus members to come forward with that information. And instead, they've just pushed through these changes and using spurious arguments that make no sense, trying to suggest that they're doing this in the name of fairness, when literally the UCP caucus in the last legislature had 60 members. Today, they have 49 because they lost 11 seats in the last election. But now they're going to have a higher caucus budget because they didn't like that Albertans returned fewer of them to the legislature and that we have the largest official opposition in Alberta's history. This is not about fairness. This is about the UCP serving themselves at taxpayer expense.
And when we asked the UCP caucus with Getson afterwards, he said that if the NDP members are so opposed to it, that they can actually refuse any of these so they wish. I guess what is your response to that, and will you be taking it?
So I haven't had a chance to talk to my caucus because so many things happened this morning. But I will say it is the UCP caucus members and the UCP government that have brought forward these increases to MLA pay and benefits during a time when Albertans are struggling through significant cost challenges. It is the UCP government, caucus and ministers that have failed to address wage stagnation in this province, rising insurance costs, rising utility costs, and rising rent, all of the things that are putting pressure on Albertans. And so it is incumbent on them to stop serving themselves and to take action on behalf of Albertans.
So I believe that in the meeting, yourself and others were talking about how the UCP MLAs are using the caucus budget to make videos attacking Nenshi. And I'm wondering, for people who don't follow along and don't know what the caucus budget allocation is for, what type of work does that go towards?
So the caucus budget does a number of things. I can speak most clearly on what the Alberta NDP does. We support our shadow ministers who are there to respond to every government bill, who are also working to put forward good private members' bills and good policy proposals to make clear to Albertans that there is a clear choice that the Alberta NDP, should we be elected to government, have a plan and have ideas that will support the real goals of the Alberta people as opposed to what we see from the UCP. We have a number of staff that support the work we do in the legislature. So for the NDP caucus, I would say the majority of our caucus budget goes towards staffing. And so that's having people who are helping to support our 37 MLAs and making sure that we're ready for the legislature and outside of the legislature. In preparing, so we got notice about 48 hours in advance that the UCP caucus might be wanting to make an adjustment to the caucus budget formula. And I asked one of our researchers who we have on staff, what has the UCP caucus been using their advertising spending on? Because that is something that you can find out. And I got a wall of graphics attacking Naheed Nenshi over the past 6 months. They have been spending a lot of money on attack ads, and I feel like this $1 million plus increase is going to a UCP tax/fund because they do not like the new Alberta NDP leader and are worried about how successful he was in our leadership race.
And you mentioned there that you got about 48 hours of sort of a general notice that something was coming. You've been in this role like 10 years as an MLA. Can you talk to like the process of how things like members' compensation is normally decided versus how this process played out with the caucus?
Absolutely. The process that we saw here today is, in my experience, unprecedented. Normally, for changes like this that impact the budget of the Legislative Assembly office, the Member Services Committee will often have briefing materials prepared by the Legislative Assembly, maybe cross-jurisdictional reports, perhaps different options might be presented if somebody is trying to achieve a goal. In the case of members' compensation, a subcommittee was created and an independent consultant was retained who provided advice that we could then respond to. It should not be that the UCP caucus members write, I would like $1 million on a napkin, and then come into a committee meeting to make it happen. That is not an appropriate process, especially for something as important as caucus budget formulas, the funding formulas. We don't know how this change is going to impact future legislatures when the makeup of the legislature is adjusted. But we do know that for right now, it tilts the playing field in favor of the government, that it advantages a single set party, which is the UCP, and it allows them to essentially double dip, where taxpayers pay for each of their 25 ministers, giving each a chief of staff, a press secretary, a car, higher salary, a bunch of political staff, and now also more caucus funding. They have fewer MLAs this term than they did last time, and now because they wrote, I want $1 million on a napkin, they will have a higher caucus budget than they had when they had 60 MLAs.
Hi, Ms. Gray. So we know affordability is not probably becoming any better in the next little bit, and we know the wages have been frozen. So when would an increase, if at any time, be appropriate for MLAs in Alberta?
Well, I think we are looking at where we currently are and what's happening. We have a minimum wage that since the UCP government has never been increased. And many people say, I suggest, minimum wage increases should be maintained. We need to make sure that people are not falling further and further behind. And yet, minimum wage is lowest in the country here in Alberta. That's just an example. So when we're looking at a government that is saying, oh, MLAs deserve annual salary increases, we should protect ourselves from inflation, at the same time as not raising minimum wage, putting in bargaining mandates that are freezing wages for education assistants and many others who are in bargaining right now, not addressing the affordability crisis. In today's context, in no way, shape, or form could the official opposition support all of these out-of-touch increases to compensation and benefits for elected officials. Under a different government, someone who was addressing these issues, I think having a reasonable conversation about the job that we do as public servants and what makes sense going forward could be had. That's not what we have right now. We have a UCP government that's prepared to take action for themselves and not Albertans.
And then on support staff, Edmonton as well, support staff were serving notice that they were intending to strike. I know that the province, or the ATA, or not the ATA, Edmonton Public Schools had asked the province to step in and go to the mediator. What role, if any, could the province take again or government take again now that that cooling off period with the mediator is finished and now they're back at it?
So certainly my caucus will have more to say on that tomorrow. I will just say that the government's role is that they are responsible for forcing our education system to this point by having the lowest education funding in the country, the lowest per capita funding for students, forcing school boards to make very tough decisions. And so I think while this is happening, while this becomes disruptive for parents, we cannot forget that it is the UCP's government's chronic underfunding of education that has caused this. But the caucus will have more to say tomorrow.
Thank you. We'll go online now, and Lisa, your line should be open.
Hello, can you hear me?
We can hear you.
Yes.
Great, thanks. I lost the plot a little bit during the committee meeting about MLAs seeing their pay adjusted at the same rate as the provincial public service. What is that rate? I understand that it's been capped, but I'm not entirely sure what that rate is, or is it still in collective bargaining?
So what has now been moved through that motion is going forward, there is a monthly bargaining report that the Jobs Ministry puts out. And if you go to that bargaining report, they have something called the average weighted public sector bargaining. It's not always an increase, but what that percentage is. Essentially, they are tying MLA increases to what that number is going to look like. So for 2024, that number, I believe, is currently sitting at 2.2%. So I don't know the details on how that number is calculated, but it's something the Jobs Ministry has been putting out for a very, very long time. It's based off of the collective agreements as they get negotiated. And so to see what it has been in the past or what it might look like, you can go to the Alberta Open Data and find those bargaining update monthly reports. And on the last one, which was in November, I think it's like page 18, you can see that's the number that they've chosen. I don't know if that helps.
You have a follow-up?
Yeah.
Yep, go ahead.
Thanks. The other question that I had, I'm looking back at MLA compensation adjustments over the years. Back in 2019, Jason Kenney, there was a cut to their pay. But this would represent the first increase to MLA pay, I think, since 2012, 2013. Can you give some historical context on that side?
Yeah, so on the Legislative Assembly website at assembly.ab.ca, if you go into the members section, there's actually a compensation history, and you can see what that looks like. Around 2012, with the John Major report, I think was the last major kind of review with a subcommittee and analysis. In this case, an independent judge was asked to weigh in, and I think that was the last time that was significantly undertaken. And then there have been two rollbacks that have happened, one under the NDP government and one under Jason Kenney's UCP government. So this is the first increase because MLA pay has been frozen over a number of years.
Okay, thank you. We'll just do one more quick pass for questions. I see Catherine approaching the mic. Okay, one more question.
Okay. Well, I have a couple, but on the golden parachute thing, that was something that was cut in 2012, and the whip had said that there was this report of Lorenzo Berardinetti in Ontario he was an MPP but then was homeless. I'm one, and there are restrictions on post-political employment. I'm wondering what's wrong with the golden parachute.
So again, the context that we're in right now, with minimum wage having been frozen, with the largest affordability crisis that we have seen in decades, with families struggling, and this UCP government not taking action to address the wage growth issues and what we are seeing, they could raise minimum wage. They could do things to help Alberta families. And instead, they have raised their own salaries. That golden parachute, that one-time payment, is not going to keep anyone out of the homeless shelter. It was an interesting comment that he had about that particular situation for that MPP. But really, ongoing and unprecedented affordability crisis is hitting Albertans, and the UCP government's #1 priority is themselves.
One last question.
Yeah, one last question. So you mentioned 2019 and the pay cut under Jason Kenney, and it was sort of a pretext for austerity, saying, hey, we're being leaders, we're tightening our belts. And that was ahead of public sector bargaining. We have a lot of public sector bargaining to come. Are you hopeful that this is an example where they could change their mind and say, yeah, we need to raise the minimum wage now. Yeah, we'll do more to help those Albertans, as you're asking.
I absolutely want the UCP government to listen to their constituents, to listen to Albertans about the affordability crisis, about how expensive absolutely everything is getting, particularly the things the government is responsible for, insurance, electricity. But they should not have started by giving themselves a raise first. That is absolutely shameful. They've completely lost the plot and are out of touch with what's going on with Alberta families. And that's one of the reasons why the official opposition objected to all 5 of these increases, which we can't even fully cost out because the UCP government brought it forward in such an unconventional manner. Today was really shocking and just served the UCP and not Albertans.
Great. Thank you, everyone. That concludes our press conference for today.
Thank you.